The courtroom fell silent as Ambassador Lorenzo finished his presentation to the Florentine Council. His words had been carefully chosen, his tone measured, yet something in his speech had shifted the mood of the room from cautious optimism to barely concealed hostility. Within hours, what should have been a diplomatic triumph became a political catastrophe that would cost him his position and, nearly his life. This scene, witnessed by a young diplomatic clerk named Niccolò Machiavelli in the winter of 1503, would become one of many observations that shaped his understanding of power, human nature, and the dangerous ways our words can become our executioners. Years later, as he penned his revolutionary treatises on statecraft, Machiavelli would reflect not just on what leaders should do, but on the subtle ways their speech patterns revealed their weaknesses to enemies who knew how to listen. In the treacherous landscape of Renaissance politics, where a misplaced word could mean exile or death, Machiavelli learned that speech was never merely communication, it was reconnaissance. Every conversation was a battlefield where information was extracted, allegiances were tested, and futures were decided. The prince who could not guard his tongue would find himself guarded by others, in a cell or a grave. Part 1, The Anatomy of Verbal Betrayal. The first betrayal of speech comes not from what we say, but from what we cannot help but reveal. Machiavelli observed that even the most cunning leaders possessed verbal tells as distinctive as a merchant's signature, patterns that emerged under pressure like invisible ink held to flame. These patterns, once recognized, became weapons in the hands of those who understood their significance. The confidence paradox emerges when leaders feel compelled to assert their strength through increasingly grandiose language. Machiavelli witnessed this phenomenon repeatedly in the courts of Italy, where princes under threat would unconsciously escalate their rhetoric as their actual power diminished. Duke Cesare Borgia, before his fall, began peppering his speeches with absolute terms, never, always, impossible, certain, creating a linguistic inflation that betrayed his growing desperation. The truly powerful, Machiavelli noted, spoke with quiet precision. They used conditional language not because they were weak, but because they were strong enough to acknowledge uncertainty. When a leader begins every sentence with "I guarantee" or "there is no doubt," they reveal not confidence but its absence. The insecure mind seeks to fortify weak positions with fortress words, not realizing that these very fortifications announce the presence of something worth attacking. This pattern manifests most dangerously during negotiations. A leader who repeatedly emphasizes their absolute commitment to a position signals that the position is negotiable. Their language betrays an awareness that they may need to retreat, which experienced opponents recognize as permission to apply pressure. The verbal overcompensation becomes a roadmap to capitulation. Emotional displacement represents another form of linguistic betrayal that Machiavelli studied extensively. When individuals cannot acknowledge their true feelings, fear, anger, desire, these emotions find expression through seemingly unrelated speech patterns. A prince afraid of rebellion might speak constantly of loyalty, not realizing that his obsession with the concept reveals his doubt about its existence. Machiavelli observed this pattern in his own diplomatic missions, watching as foreign ministers who claimed complete confidence in their military positions would unconsciously pepper their conversation with references to divine providence, fortune, and fate. Their rational minds might deny uncertainty, but their speech patterns betrayed a deep awareness that factors beyond their control could determine their fate. The most sophisticated practitioners of political manipulation learn to listen for these displaced emotions like physicians listening for irregular heartbeats. When a leader's casual conversation repeatedly returns to themes of betrayal, they reveal their own capacity for faithlessness. When they obsess over others' hidden motives, they announce their own. The mind projects its contents onto the world, and speech becomes the projection screen. Information hemorrhaging occurs when speakers unconsciously reveal strategic information through seemingly innocent details. Machiavelli noted that even experienced diplomats would betray crucial intelligence through casual asides, offhand references, and attempts to appear knowledgeable. A Venetian ambassador once revealed the size and location of his city's grain reserves while attempting to demonstrate Venice's prosperity to potential allies. This betrayal happens because the human mind struggles to maintain multiple levels of deception simultaneously. While consciously controlling major talking points, speakers often relax their guard on peripheral information, not realizing that skilled listeners can reconstruct entire strategic pictures from scattered verbal fragments. Modern practitioners of this ancient art understand that the most valuable intelligence often comes not from direct questions but from creating conversational environments where speakers feel compelled to demonstrate their insider knowledge. A simple expression of uncertainty about publicly known facts can prompt corrections that reveal private intelligence. The desire to appear informed becomes a compulsion to inform others. Status insecurity manifests through subtle changes in speech patterns when individuals encounter those they perceive as threats to their position. Machiavelli observed that even powerful nobles would unconsciously alter their vocabulary, syntax, and tone when confronted with potential rivals, creating linguistic fingerprints of their insecurities. The prince who speaks differently to subordinates than to equals reveals not just his awareness of hierarchy, but his anxiety about his place within it. Those secure in their power maintain consistent speech patterns regardless of their audience, while those fearful of challenge unconsciously adopt different personas for different listeners. This phenomenon proves particularly dangerous in group settings, where shifting speech patterns can reveal alliance structures and power dynamics to observant enemies. A courtier who moderates his language in the presence of certain individuals announces those individuals' influence over him. The effort to conceal deference through casual speech often makes it more obvious to trained observers. Future anxiety emerges when speakers unconsciously reveal their expectations and fears through temporal references and hypothetical scenarios. Machiavelli noted that leaders facing uncertain futures would betray their true assessments through seemingly innocent speculation about possible outcomes. A general confident in victory speaks of the enemy in the past tense, unconsciously betraying his expectation of their defeat. A ruler uncertain about succession unconsciously focuses on short-term achievements while avoiding long-term commitments. The mind's true assessment of future probabilities leaks into present conversation like water finding cracks in stone. The most skilled political operators learn to listen for these temporal tells, understanding that what people expect to happen often matters more than what they claim will happen. The ruler who speaks of his dynasty in conditional terms reveals doubts about his legacy, creating opportunities for those bold enough to offer alternative futures. Part 2. The Mechanisms of Self-Destruction. The second phase of verbal betrayal occurs when speakers become active agents of their own downfall, using language in ways that systematically undermine their position while believing they are strengthening it. Machiavelli recognized that the most dangerous enemies were often not external opponents but internal contradictions expressed through speech. The honesty trap ensnares those who mistake transparency for strength. Machiavelli observed numerous leaders who believed that acknowledging their weaknesses would demonstrate confidence and earn respect, not realizing they were providing ammunition to future enemies. The Duke of Urbino, during a moment of candid reflection, admitted to Machiavelli his doubts about his military commander's loyalty. Within months, those same commanders had been approached by his enemies and convinced to change sides. This trap proves particularly insidious because it often produces short-term benefits. Audiences frequently respond positively to apparent honesty, creating a feedback loop that encourages further revelation. The leader who admits to past mistakes may indeed appear more human and trustworthy, but they also create a catalog of weaknesses that opponents can exploit years later. The truly Machiavellian approach requires understanding the difference between strategic vulnerability and strategic suicide. Admitting to overcome weaknesses can demonstrate growth, admitting to current vulnerabilities provides targets. The prince who confesses his fear of assassination to demonstrate his courage in facing danger has simply given potential assassins valuable intelligence about his state of mind and security concerns. Consistency compulsion destroys speakers who feel obligated to maintain logical consistency across all situations and audiences. Machiavelli understood that rigid consistency was often the enemy of effective statecraft, yet he watched leaders trap themselves with their own previous statements, unable to adapt to changing circumstances without appearing to contradict themselves. This phenomenon manifests most destructively during extended conflicts or negotiations, where positions that made sense months earlier become strategic liabilities. Leaders who publicly commit to specific outcomes find themselves forced to pursue failed strategies rather than admit their initial assessments were wrong. The verbal commitment becomes a prison built from the speaker's own words. Skilled manipulators exploit this tendency by carefully documenting their opponent's statements and, then, creating situations where those statements become disadvantageous. The leader who once proudly declared his unwillingness to compromise finds himself forced to choose between breaking his word or pursuing disaster. The original statement, meant to project strength, becomes the weapon used against him. Over-explanation syndrome afflicts speakers who provide more justification than necessary for their decisions, unconsciously revealing the existence of alternative options they considered but rejected. Machiavelli noted that when leaders spent excessive time explaining why they chose a particular course of action, they often inadvertently outlined the very vulnerabilities their enemies needed to understand. This pattern proves especially dangerous because the speaker believes they are demonstrating thoughtfulness and thorough consideration. In reality, they are providing a detailed map of their decision-making process, including the factors they found most concerning and the alternatives they found most tempting. Enemy strategists can use this information to predict future behavior and design targeted pressures. The over-explainer also reveals their own uncertainty about their choices. Decisions made with genuine confidence require minimal justification, while decisions made despite doubt compel extensive rationalization. The length and complexity of explanations become inverse indicators of the speaker's actual confidence in their position. Authority undermining occurs when speakers unconsciously signal their awareness that their power depends on external validation rather than intrinsic strength. Machiavelli observed that insecure leaders would betray their dependence on others' approval through subtle linguistic patterns that sophisticated opponents could exploit. References to popular support, divine approval, or traditional legitimacy often reveal anxiety about these very sources of authority. The king who repeatedly mentions his divine right to rule broadcasts his awareness that this right is questioned. The general who constantly cites his soldiers' loyalty suggests he fears their defection. This pattern creates opportunities for enemies who understand that acknowledged dependencies become vulnerable points. The leader who admits his power depends on others' continued support has identified the exact pressure points opponents should target. Revolutionary movements have long understood that the most effective way to topple authority is to undermine its claimed sources of legitimacy, a task made easier when the authority figure himself identifies those sources through anxious repetition. Alliance betrayal manifests when speakers reveal information about their partnerships that compromises their allies' positions or their own. Machiavelli witnessed numerous instances where leaders, attempting to demonstrate their importance or insider knowledge, would inadvertently expose strategic relationships that were more valuable when hidden. This betrayal often occurs during attempts to impress potential new allies or intimidate enemies. The temptation to hint at powerful backing or secret agreements can lead speakers to reveal information that makes those very relationships less effective. The general who suggests he has reliable intelligence sources compromises those sources. The diplomat who hints at secret negotiations may destroy them entirely. The most successful political operators understand that the value of many relationships depends on their ambiguity. Enemies who cannot be certain about alliance structures must prepare for multiple scenarios, spreading their resources thin. The moment those relationships become clear, opponents can design targeted strategies to exploit specific weaknesses in the alliance network. Temporal displacement occurs when speakers reveal their true priorities and concerns through unconscious emphasis on particular time frames. Machiavelli noted that leaders facing immediate threats would unconsciously focus on short-term considerations in all their conversations, even when discussing supposedly long-term strategies. This pattern betrays not just current preoccupations but also assessments of future probability. The ruler who cannot stop discussing immediate challenges while claiming to plan for decades reveals his doubt about surviving the immediate challenges. The general who focuses obsessively on next week's battle while discussing campaign strategy suggests he expects the war to be decided soon, one way or another. Experienced opponents learn to calibrate their strategies based on these temporal reveals. If an enemy leader's speech patterns suggest they expect conflict to end quickly, patient opponents can design extended campaigns that exhaust their adversary's psychological resources. If the patterns suggest fear of long-term consequences, immediate pressure may force hasty decisions. Part 3, The Arsenal of Awareness. The final dimension of Machiavellian speech analysis involves understanding how to protect oneself from these verbal betrayals while simultaneously exploiting them in others. This requires developing what Machiavelli might have called linguistic fortification, the ability to construct speech patterns that reveal nothing while appearing to reveal everything. Strategic ambiguity becomes not a weakness but a weapon in the hands of those who understand its proper application. Machiavelli learned from observing master diplomatists who could speak at length without committing to specific positions, creating impressions of agreement in multiple contradictory parties simultaneously. This skill required more than simple evasiveness. It demanded the ability to speak in ways that allowed listeners to hear confirmation of their own beliefs. The technique involves constructing statements that contain multiple valid interpretations while appearing to have only one clear meaning. Skilled practitioners learn to use pronouns without clear antecedents, temporal references without specific dates, and conditional statements that seem absolute to casual listeners but contain escape clauses for careful readers. This approach proves particularly valuable during periods of uncertainty, when premature commitment to specific positions can prove catastrophic. The leader who masters strategic ambiguity can maintain maximum flexibility while creating the impression of decisive leadership. Followers interpret the ambiguous statements as confirmation of their preferred strategies, while the leader retains the ability to claim consistency regardless of which direction circumstances ultimately force them to move. Controlled revelation transforms the seemingly dangerous practice of sharing information into a tool for manipulation and control. Rather than avoiding all personal disclosure, masters of this technique learn to share carefully selected vulnerabilities that create specific impressions while concealing more significant weaknesses. The process requires understanding the psychological dynamics of trust and reciprocity. Audiences who believe they have been trusted with sensitive information often reciprocate with their own revelations, creating an information imbalance that favors the controlled revealer. The key lies in choosing admissions that appear significant to the listener while actually providing no useful intelligence to potential enemies. Machiavelli observed that successful practitioners often admitted to weaknesses they had already overcome or vulnerabilities they could easily defend against. These admissions created impressions of honesty and self-awareness while actually strengthening the speaker's position by demonstrating their ability to acknowledge and address challenges. Linguistic mirroring allows skilled conversationalists to extract information by reflecting their target's own speech patterns and emotional states back to them. This technique exploits the human tendency to feel understood and validated by those who communicate in familiar ways, leading targets to reveal more than they intended. The practice involves subtle adjustments to vocabulary, pacing, emotional tone, and even political perspectives to match those of the target. Rather than obvious mimicry, effective linguistic mirroring requires understanding the underlying patterns of thought and expression that characterize different personality types and adapting communication style to resonate with each target's preferred methods of processing information. Masters of this technique can conduct conversations where their targets feel so understood and accepted that they voluntarily provide sensitive information, strategic assessments, and personal vulnerabilities without realizing they are being systematically debriefed. The skill proves particularly valuable in diplomatic contexts, where the ability to make foreign representatives feel heard and respected can unlock crucial intelligence about their nation's true positions and intentions. Pressure testing involves creating conversational situations that force targets to reveal information through their responses to carefully designed challenges. Rather than asking direct questions that alert targets to information-gathering attempts, skilled practitioners learn to construct scenarios that compel revelation through natural defensive responses. This technique exploits the human tendency to correct misstatements and defend against perceived attacks. By making deliberately inaccurate claims about situations within the target's knowledge, practitioners can elicit corrections that reveal accurate information. By suggesting slightly wrong interpretations of the target's motivations or strategies, they can prompt defensive explanations that expose actual plans and concerns. The approach requires careful calibration to avoid alerting targets to the manipulation. The misstatements must be plausible enough that corrections seem natural rather than strategic, and the challenges must be subtle enough to trigger defensive responses without creating suspicion about the challenger's motives. Temporal manipulation exploits the ways stress and uncertainty affect people's ability to maintain consistent deception over extended periods. Machiavelli understood that sustained lying requires significant cognitive resources, and that extended conversations could exhaust even skilled deceivers' ability to maintain false narratives. This technique involves prolonging discussions beyond their natural endpoints, returning to previous topics with slight variations, and asking for elaboration on complex explanations. As targets become mentally fatigued, their ability to remember earlier statements and maintain consistent stories decreases, leading to contradictions and inadvertent revelations. Effective temporal manipulation also involves creating time pressure that forces quick responses before targets can carefully consider their answers. The combination of mental fatigue and temporal pressure can cause even experienced deception practitioners to reveal information they intended to conceal. Environmental orchestration recognizes that physical and social contexts significantly influence speech patterns and information sharing. Masters of this approach learn to create or exploit environmental factors that encourage the types of conversations they want to have with specific targets. This might involve choosing meeting locations that create particular psychological states, formal settings that encourage careful, diplomatic language, or informal settings that promote casual revelations. It can include arranging social contexts where targets feel pressure to demonstrate knowledge or insider status, leading to competitive information sharing. The technique also exploits alcohol consumption, fatigue, emotional stress, and other factors that reduce inhibitions and careful speech control. Rather than directly inducing these states, skilled practitioners learn to recognize when they occur naturally and adapt their conversational strategies to take advantage of targets' reduced defenses. The observer's paradox represents the final and most sophisticated level of Machiavellian speech analysis, the understanding that awareness of these techniques changes their effectiveness. Once individuals know they are being analyzed for verbal tells and unconscious revelations, their speech patterns adapt, creating new challenges for information extraction. This paradox requires practitioners to develop multiple layers of analysis, understanding not just natural speech patterns but also the patterns that emerge when people are consciously trying to control their verbal output. The over-controlled speech of someone aware they are being analyzed contains its own information about their knowledge, concerns, and strategic thinking. Advanced practitioners learn to create conversational environments where targets become so focused on controlling some aspects of their speech that they lose control over others. By directing conscious attention towards specific verbal behaviors, skilled manipulators can create blind spots where other information leaks through unconscious channels. The mastery of these techniques represents more than tactical advantage in isolated encounters. For Machiavelli, understanding the way speech could betray speakers was essential to comprehending the deeper mechanics of human nature and political power. Language was not simply a tool for communication but a window into the fundamental drivers of human behavior: fear, desire, ambition, insecurity, that determined the rise and fall of princes and kingdoms. In the end, Machiavelli's hard truth about speech was not that it inevitably betrays us, but that it reveals us. Every word we speak contains information about our internal states, strategic thinking, and hidden vulnerabilities. The choice is not whether to reveal ourselves through speech, that revelation is inevitable, but whether to control what we reveal and to understand what others are revealing to us. The prince who masters these arts gains more than tactical advantage in individual conversations. They develop the ability to read the deeper currents of human motivation and political dynamics that determine the fate of nations. In a world where information is power and understanding is survival, the ability to decode the hidden messages in human speech becomes perhaps the most valuable skill a leader can possess. This knowledge comes with its own burden. Those who truly understand the way speech betrays human thoughts and feelings often find themselves isolated by their own insights, seeing motivations and deceptions that others miss, bearing the lonely weight of unwanted clarity about human nature. Yet for Machiavelli, this burden was the price of effectiveness in a world where the alternative to harsh truth was often catastrophic illusion. The ambassador who fell that winter day in Florence fell not because his enemies were stronger, but because they listened more carefully to what his words revealed about his state of mind, his strategic position, and his hidden fears. His speech betrayed him not through any single dramatic revelation, but through the accumulated weight of small tells and unconscious patterns that painted a picture of vulnerability for those who knew how to read it. In recognizing these patterns in others while guarding against them in ourselves, we honor Machiavelli's fundamental insight that power belongs not to the strong or the righteous, but to those who understand reality most clearly and act upon that understanding most effectively. Our words will always reveal us. The question is whether we will control that revelation or be controlled by it.